All right, continuing on here. So, a physician determines the cause of death. Now, in Oklahoma, on your trip ticket forms, they're going to have presumed causes of death, and that means what you think it could be. Mostly, you're going to put presumed cardiac. All right, but presumptive signs of death are important to know. Unresponsive to painful stimuli, and we'll show you how to do that probably in the assessment section. The lack of carotid pulse or heartbeat, absent breath sounds, they're not breathing basically, and no deep tending of corneal reflexes, you typically will check those. But absence of eye movements, no blood pressure, profound cyanosis, which means when their skin is blue because they can't breathe, and then a lowered or decreased body temperature. Now, definitive signs of death, these are ones you really have to know. All right, these are people you don't work on. So this is dependent lividity. It's an obvious sign of death whenever you show up. It's from gravity, and it will pull the blood toward the bottom, toward, the ground. All right, so that's just the settling in blood. Any decapitation, obviously, that's going to be a definitive sign of death. Rigor mortis is just a stiffening. It starts in the jaw. That's important to know. So when you try and open an airway, basically open the patient's mouth. Okay, it's that sort of stiffening. There's algor mortis, which is cooling of the body to the ambient temperature of the environment. Okay, and then decomposition. You'll be able to smell these people. That's obvious signs of death. You don't have to work on those people at all. Just put it in your paperwork. Medical examiner cases. All right, it depends on the nature and scene of death. Police are usually the people that call out the ME on these people. They're notified in cases of dead on arrival. All right, DOAs, death without any previous medical care, so you couldn't do anything, dependent on lividity, decapitation, that sort of stuff. Suicides and violent deaths, the ME is always going to be on, especially if they think there's a potential, at least, for a murder conviction. And then known or suspected poisoning, they'll call it. So if someone's poisoned with cyanide, for instance, you'll smell what they call bitter almonds. That's going to be one of the signs, so they're going to look for that sort of thing. Accidental deaths, your trauma accidents, your vehicle accidents, any criminal act that could occur with a death, and then every infant child, because it's not normal for them to actually pass away. Organ donors. So they express the wish to donate their organs. It's usually on their license. All right. It's evidenced by information on their license. They can also have a donor card. So your priority is always to save the patient's life. And so remember that the organs actually need oxygen. So the Oklahoma Life Share are the people who work with the organs here throughout Oklahoma. So they're really important to actually have. So they take the organs from the hospital. Everybody that donates organs, they can donate all of them. And they can actually save 7 people's lives. So there's an example of an organ or tissue donor card. The tissue donor, what they mean by that are things like corneas. They can actually give them to people as well. So some people will have medical ID bracelets or cards indicating they have a DNR. You still have to have the DNR, even if they have the tattoo, or if they have some sort of bracelet or keychain that says they have a DNR. It's going to explain their allergies on some people. These are people with chronic medical condition, diabetes, epilepsy. I had a patient that had one that had serious migraines on it, because sometimes migraines can mimic the symptoms of a stroke. So that patient wanted us to know that they actually can have that happen. All right. Some patients wear that bracelet with a USB flash drive that can actually give the hospital information. See, there's one. I think it has it. Scope of practice. This is what you can do. And we're going to teach you your full scope of practice, at least for the state of Oklahoma, which is beyond the national standard. It's defined by the state law, what EMTs can and cannot do. And it's developed by the medical director and their protocols and standing orders. Like we said before, the medical director can't go beyond what the state says that you can do, but they can limit it if they feel the need to. So carrying out a procedure outside your scope of practice can be negligence, which is a civil offense. All right, so you have to have things like breach of duty. It's all listed in your chapter here to actually have a negligence charge. There's several things they have to prove, but in civil cases, they don't have to convince all 12 jurors. They only have to convince 7 of them. All right, there can be criminal offenses for things like kidnapping, abandonment. So if you leave the scene and the scene was safe, and you just got frustrated with the patient and you just leave, that's a criminal offense. Okay? Also, you need to be aware, even though you're an EMT, if you're not on duty and you show up to things like a motor vehicle crash, all right, you can only render the care that a normal person can render. You can't do the full EMT scope. All right, you can render the basic first aid stuff. Things like we did in the CPR class. Your standards of care is how you have to act and behave, and it should be standardized between all EMTs. All right, you have to be concerned about the safety and welfare of others. That's basically the job they're doing. So make sure you're professional at all times is basically the point. You don't render less care to someone for any reason. Whether it's discriminatory, race or sexual orientation, or because of their living conditions, whether they're poor or they're rich, it doesn't matter. Everybody gets the same care. So to satisfy local custom, basically your protocols, your standing orders and stuff by the law. There are statutes, there are ordinances against this, professional institute guidelines. So that CPR class that we took here, and then things like the curriculum established in your textbook. So there are actual acts. Here's one of the ordinances, the Medical Practices Act. It's to satisfy your certification and your licensure in this state and your credentialing within your actual ambulance service. And over all that in Chapter 1. You do have a duty to act when you're actually on an ambulance. You actually have to do something so long the scene is safe, obviously. So once your ambulance responds to a call and once your treatment has begun, you have a duty to act. If you don't actually act when you should, that could be the civil charge of negligence. Yeah, and basically, if you didn't know, it's fair to provide the same care for each patient, like per your training. Okay, so in every situation that you can think of where there's an actual protocol, you need to provide the same care. So there's going to be 4 elements, and you're going to have to know here for negligence duty. You have a duty to act. That's what we went over before. You need to do something. You breach that duty. Okay, you actually caused damage to the patient. All right, and there was causation involved there. That actually, what you did caused something to happen to the patient. Not just the patient was injured, that what your negligence actually caused me injured. It's a local. Yeah, this is where the injury was in your control, basically, and it doesn't occur unless you actually made the negligent act. You didn't do something, so it caused greater injury. All right, negligence per se, that's the conduct is being sued unless that occurred in clear violation of a statute and in clear violation of law. So a lot of times what's going to happen is these negligence suits are going to be torts, which are civil offenses, civil wrongs. It's going to be in civil court, and it's a lot easier to prove than a criminal case. By the way, they had to prove all 4 of those things they need for negligence, like duty to act. Unilateral care by the MT can't be without patient consent. All right, they're going to have to sign that form and all that stuff. Get that as best you can. You have to make provisions for continuing care, which means that you can't just drop them off on the side of the road when they want to go to the hospital. That would be called abandonment. All right, that is a criminal act. You can abandon them at the scene, or you can even abandon them in the emergency departments. So remember that. Make sure you get that handoff report. That is technically a courtesy, but you need to do it. You need to tell them that the patient is there. You can't just drop them off the front. Right? Always obtain a signature. It is within your power on your patient care report. Now, this signature can be the patient, and that's what you want. But they have to be conscious, and they actually have to know what they're signing. You have to explain what they're signing. Now, if the patient's unconscious, the best course of action would be to get someone like a power of attorney to sign, or a relative that's there that gives you permission to treat and transport the patient. If you're unable to do that, you have to get nurses' signatures at the hospital, and they actually sign that they've taken over care of the patient, basically. That prevents you from getting abandonment charges and things like that. Assault and battery. So you need to know this. These are always on the test for some reason. So there is a difference. Assault is a threat of violence, basically, a threat of bodily harm, but battery is going to be actually touching someone, even just touching someone. It's not just punching them in the face. It's just touching them without their consent, which is why expressing consent is so important. So I'll even tell someone, hey, I'm going to take your pulse. So they can hold up their arm for me, that sort of thing. All right. Kidnapping. Yeah. So if you transport someone to a hospital when they don't want to go, and they actually have the capacity to refuse that care, that's called kidnapping. All right. False imprisonment is unauthorized confinement of a person, like if you confine them in the ambulance. All right. While kidnapping is abducting them, carrying them away by force, or forcing them to go to the hospital. All these are criminal charges, and you'll enjoy a nice prison sentence after you do them. Defamation, this is more civil stuff. That's false information that damages the reputation. It's important to know the difference between the two here, libel and slander. So slander is things you can say, so they can sue you for things that you say. And libel is a written communication of false information. It's written defamation. So that includes things like in your run reports. So watch that sort of stuff. Be objective in all your paperwork that you do. Be objective in the things you write down. Good Samaritan laws. If you're reasonably trying to help someone and something happens to them, you're protected by these laws. All right. But the conditions that have to be met, good faith, you're really trying to help somebody. Right? You're not expecting compensation. It's within your scope of training, and you do not act in a grossly negligent manner. Most of these laws only apply if you're not at work. Right? If you're at work, you have to apply all those negligence things like duty to act. So gross negligence is very bad. It's willful disregard for someone. All right, that's serious stuff. Immunity statutes that apply to EMS systems are considered governmental agencies a lot of the times. So they have something called sovereign immunity. It provides limitations on liability, like things like caps on how much what someone can sue you for. But it's not complete immunity. Okay? So there's still big fines. You have to compile a record of all incidents in any patient you come in contact with, and even in patients you don't come in contact with, such as sometimes you're going to be dispatched or called every now and again. The person is going to leave for some reason before you get there. You still have to document that stuff. Even if you're canceled before you get to the scene, you're going to have to document that stuff. So it's a safeguard against legal problems, okay? So the courts consider things like if you don't write it in your run report, you didn't do it. Okay, so any action that's not recorded wasn't performed. So if you were supposed to do something and you did it, but you didn't record it, that can still get you a negligence charge just because you didn't write it in your run report. So if your reports are, incomplete, all right, it's poor emergency care even though you did the actual action. So you have to actually be very thorough in your paperwork. So we'll go over actually how to do this here in a while. So Nemesis. This is an information system. So it gives you, or actually it gives the system an ability to collect and store and share standardized data. It improves the speed and accuracy of the data. So it could be things, even like scientific studies that have been done. So there is mandatory reporting. Okay, and states have laws about mandatory reporting. If you witness something that you just think could be child abuse, or elder abuse, or really domestic events where basically the injuries that you see do not correspond to the story that's given by the patient or by a bystander, you need to report that. That has to be investigated. Anything that happens so far as injuries when a felony is committed has to be reported. Drug-related injuries. There's some gray area in this. Drug-related injuries doesn't mean that someone overdosed on drugs. Okay? Nobody's going to arrest somebody just because they're high, right? Not even the cops. They understand now more thoroughly, so long as there's not paraphernalia or other drugs on the scene, or they have enough drugs to sell, that sort of stuff. But any drug-related injuries, every childbirth has to be recorded. Okay? They can't hide that there was the birth of a child, because that child is way more prone to be abused and be murdered and that sort of stuff. You always have to report the childbirth. All right. Now, if you actually have an OB call where childbirth actually happens, well, congratulations. Now you have more paperwork to do because you have 2 patients instead of 1. But it's a happy event for most people. Also, attempted suicides. PD is going to be on scene if it's going to be attempted suicide, but if the story doesn't match up with their injuries again and you think it could be suicide, you have to report that. And there's going to be protocols and things for this. Usually you contact your supervisor, or you can call Adult Protective Services in Oklahoma. All you have to do is Google that number. All right, Child Protective Services. You need to contact police for this sort of stuff. Bites have to be reported. Communicable diseases have to be reported. This doesn't mean that you need to report to everybody that has, hepatitis C or HIV. Right? It means things like, oh, there's monkeypox here, and we need to tell people what we work with because standard precautions have to be met. Assault and domestic violence, like I said. Watch for stories that don't correspond to injuries. All right? That's really important. As sexual assault or rapes, anybody that actually reports a sexual assault, you have to report it to you. Rather, you have to report exposures to infectious disease. You can't just sweep that under the rug. There are protocols and procedures for that. Transport of patient and restraints, yeah, that definitely has to be reported. That has to be in your paperwork, definitely. Crime scenes, and then anybody that's deceased, you're always going to do paperwork and stuff like that. Right? And then police are usually involved, PD, sheriff department, that sort of thing. Okay, so it's important to know the difference between ethics and morality. Ethics is sort of philosophical systems of right or wrong, moral duties, and then professional behavior. Morality is the code of conduct that actually affects these things. So your code of conduct affects your behavior. All right. Your code of conduct affects your actual conduct, which basically what you think you should do affects the things you do and your conscience. All right. Bioethics has to do specifically with ethical systems that affect biology. It could be things like birth control and that people have, things like that. Even that sort of stuff is under bioethics. Organ donation is under bioethics. They all address the practice of healthcare. All right. And there's many more things to do. Oh, as far as bioethics, I want to point out some other stuff. There are people that don't believe they should go to doctors. They're allowed, so long as they're competent, not to go to a doctor. They also can limit and not have certain procedures, things like blood transfusion. Jehovah's Witnesses are usually the people we think of that don't get blood transfusions. People that are Christian Scientists generally don't do doctors very well, so they're not going to be up on their immunizations. So they're going to be more prone to things like measles and mumps. So these ethical systems basically require you to evaluate your own ethical standards, and those of the profession. We have ethical standards in EMS. All right, kindness and compassion is at the top. Advocacy for the patient. That's part of the ethical standards. Whether or not you agree with their decision, if they're legally able to make it, you need to advocate for that decision. So long as you actually make sure that they understand the full scope of the decision they're making, the benefits and the drawbacks of it. All right. So these ethical responsibilities allow the rules and laws and policies to guide your decision. You may go to court. A lot of times, if you're on advanced service, they're going to ask the paramedic to go to court, but it's basically whoever took that patient. All right, you're mostly going to be a witness, okay, for things like criminal cases. But if you're negligent or something like that, or you actually committed a crime, you could be the defendant. All right, so it could either be civil or criminal cases. When you're called to testify, it says notify your service director. If they call you to testify, they're going to probably notify them first, and the service director is going to tell you, and then notify legal counsel. the service that you're actually with may actually have lawyers on retainer. Most of them do. Right? As a witness, always remain neutral, objective in what you say. All right, and review the run report before you go to court. You're actually not allowed to read from the run report when you're on the witness stand, but you can use it to refresh your memory. But you can't just give a reading to the run report. So, as a defendant, an attorney is required. So, there are several cases that actually have gone to the Supreme Court on what you actually need an attorney for, and it's basically everything. But defenses can include things like statutes of limitations. Time frames do run out to actually bring charges. Governmental immunity. We're not going to have a lot of that. Contributory negligence, things like that. You're not going to have to know much about contributory negligence. Discovery, which is basically the sharing of information between prosecution and defense. It allows both sides to have all the information available. All right. If they withhold information, that's illegal. That's going against discovery. Everybody has to have all the same information from the trial. Now, they might not be able to present everything in the trial, but they all have the same information. So interrogatories, these are written requests or questions. Depositions are oral requests. So you can actually have an interrogatory. Those aren't used very often, where you would actually just write out what you would say on the witness stand, basically. But you can be deposed. Most cases are settled following discovery, because one side is obviously going to win, and they don't want to use the money to actually go to court, so they may settle at that time. But if it's not settled, we go to trial. Most of the subpoenas that I've gotten have been settled far before I've actually had to go to trial. So, but damages can be awarded in some trials for compensation, like the patient's medical bill, and punitive, meaning punishing you for whatever actions there was, or the defense is punished for their actions. It doesn't necessarily have to be you. But any EMT charged with a criminal offense should secure a lawyer, all right, an experienced criminal attorney. All right, good. So here we are at the end here. We'll try and do some of these questions. Let's break these down here. So you arrive at the scene of an older woman. All right, she's complaining of chest pain. In assessing her, she holds her arm out for you to take blood pressure. Well, I actually use this example in the lecture, so you should know what kind of consent this is. All right, so if she is expressing herself with her body that you're able to take a blood pressure, that's going to be express consent. Apparently, it's actually called actual consent. Sometimes I've never heard that, but all right. All right, which of the following example of abandonment? All right, if an EMT leaves the scene after a competent adult has refused care? No, not really. EMT transferred care of a patient to an emergency department nurse? No, that's okay. So an EMT transferred care to a paramedic? No, that's fine. So it's going to be D here. So on advanced EMT, transfer care to an EMR. The basic point of this question is you need to know that whoever you transfer care to has to be at or above your level. So an EMT can't transfer care to an EMR basically definitively. If you're at a scene like a traffic accident where there's a whole lot of patients, you can triage people, which basically means you're going around looking for who's the most injured, and you might assign an EMR then to look at after a patient until you can come back when you've done all this triage and can have enough resources. But if you're an advanced or an EMT and transfer to an EMR definitively, that's just abandonment. It's going to be abandonment as well. It's not just leaving someone at the scene. It's leaving them in the care of someone who doesn't have as much experience or as much training as you, rather that's what it is. So, one thing you should know, this at or, above your level of care, when you go into an emergency department, you can transfer care to an LPN or an RN. All right. Or there's going to be like EMTs and paramedics there. If they agree to sign that paperwork and they're at or above your level, they can do that. Doctors can sign that too. Yeah, so the answer is D. All right. The unauthorized confinement of a person. Right, this is where you can find someone. So we went over two of these. One of these had to do with kidnapping, forcibly taking somewhere and confining them. Right, that's not one of the answers. So the other one should kind of be all these. It should be false imprisonment. So assault is basically a threat. Battery is actually basically trying to hurt someone or just touching them without their permission. And then slander is going to be talking falsely about somebody. So that should be C, and it is. All right. Failure of the EMT to provide the same care as another EMT with the same training. All right. So what is this called? So remember we talked about this. It's not going to be libel, so that's going to be written falsehoods. Slander is going to be spoken falsehood. Abandonment is leaving someone, without any care or at a lower level of care than you. This is going to be negligence here. So you don't provide the same care as any other, a competent EMT would as negligence. All right, an 8-year-old boy was struck by a car. He's unconscious. He's bleeding from the mouth. Police officer tells you that he is unable to contact the child's parents. Well, I would hope the police officer would instead be trying to render aid to this patient as best he could, but okay. He was trying to call the kid's parents. I don't know how he got the number, if the child was unconscious, but all right. So what should we do? This one should be fairly obvious. We should probably, try and treat and save this child's life. Okay? We should do that as soon as possible. We're not going to wait in this situation because they're unconscious and bleeding for a parent to be contacted. This isn't a twisted ankle. This is something that requires a time-sensitive treatment. So we're not going to continue the treatment only if authorized by medical control. This is implied consent. So you're going to treat this patient without medical control. You don't need to bother those people with this. And you're not going to do halfway measures. That would be negligent. So it can't be D, where you only provide airway management. All right, what is this one? An events directive is what? So a set of specific guidelines that clearly defines different types of consent, a formal list that defines by state law whether a patient has decision-making capacity, a written document that specifies the care you should provide if the patient is unable to make decisions, a verbal order given to you by a dying patient's family regarding whether the treatment should be provided. All right, so advance directives are written. These are legal documents. Here's why it's C. All right, which of the following patients is competent can legally refuse EMS care? Well, let's look at this. A confused young female that states she is the president. Well, yeah, no. A man who's staggering states he drank only 3 beers. A conscious and alert woman who's in severe pain from a broken leg. That one is going to be most correct. A diabetic patient who has slurred speech is not aware of the date. If they don't know what month it is, they're not in their right state of mind. The answer B here, that depends on your protocols. You're usually going to have to contact the supervisor about control or something like that to actually talk to these patients. Yeah, so let's see. Okay. So you're treating a patient with apparent emotional crisis. Right, that can be many things. After the patient refuses treatment, you tell him that you will call the police and have him restrained if he does not give you consent. Ooh, well, that's not good. Your actions in the case are example 1, yeah. So you're threatening him with restraint. So is that assault, battery, negligent, or abandonment? Yeah, that's obviously A. You're making a threat. So you have a legal duty to act. If you are what? Off duty and witness a major car accident? No, not really. A volunteer is on duty and is dispatched on a call. Paid for your service, but is not on duty. Out of your jurisdiction and see a man choking. So what do you think it is? That's obviously going to be B. Doesn't matter if you're paid or a volunteer, you got a legal duty to act because you're on duty. That's basically the point of this, knowing that you have a duty to act when you're on duty. All right, which of the following statements about records and reports is false? Legally, if it was not documented, it was not performed. We said that's actually true. A complete accurate report is an important safeguard against legal problems. That's true as well. Let's see what C and D is here. An incomplete or untidy patient care report is evidence of incomplete or inexperience in emergency medical care, or your patient care report does not become part of the patient's hospital record because your treatment was provided outside the hospital. So I didn't actually go over this, but it should be fairly obvious to you. Yeah, the answer is D. They actually put that in their patient file in the hospital. So if someone goes up to the ICU, I've read the reports of the ICU. They actually have the EMS reports there when they get those. All the others are true.